Hi, I'm Shrankhla, the founder and CEO of Uma, an Ayurvedic beauty and wellness collection. This is the Uma Ayurveda podcast. Each week, I'll be having a conversation with someone I greatly admire on the topics of Ayurveda, holistic healing, spiritual well-being, and alternative health. By sharing wisdom, I hope to share a personal truth and revelation with you that as ancient as they are, Ayurveda and other healing modalities are as modern and relevant today as ever. Board-certified internist and Ayurvedic practitioner Dr. Nisha Khanna takes an inspirational, layered, and modern approach to medicine. In her blended practice, Nisha incorporates traditional Western medicine, offering telemedicine to patients as well as mind, body, spirit treatment plans in which she incorporates Ayurveda and other ancient modalities. She often takes a look at the physical ailments and then dives deeper by considering the emotional, mental, and spiritual components. This allows for the discovery of unresolved trauma and a better understanding of the roots of the manifesting disease. In her illuminating conversation with me, Nisha points out the ways Ayurveda can offer us illuminating feedback on our health, the questions we ask about ourselves, and how to treat the true roots to a wellness issue. I am very, very excited to welcome you and hear all that you have to say and share your magical wisdom with me as well as our listeners.
Sounds great. I'm really happy to be here.
Nisha, so you're a board-certified internist who has been practicing medicine for over 15 years now. I'd love to start by asking how you see the two healing modalities, traditional Western medicine, as well as Ayurvedic wisdom, coexist with each other.
Well, I think I've created my own version of what I call functional Ayurveda, which is a blend of functional medicine and Ayurvedic medicine to really have that marriage. Because traditional Western medicine, I would feel, is really far removed from Ayurvedic medicine in that it does not have a whole lot to inform patients about with regards to disease prevention and dietary and lifestyle suggestions. I think it is getting there and it will catch up eventually, but those two seem pretty disconnected. And I think that's why I really gravitated towards Ayurveda, was to try to fill in those gaps. And so currently I have a blended practice where I continue to practice traditional Western medicine to a degree, and I have my days sort of split up where I do telemedicine in that format, and then I get to create these afternoons with clients where I go really in depth in a total mind, body, spirit treatment plans, and venture into this whole body healing where I practice more of the functional medicine and Ayurveda combo, bringing in other modalities as well, such as I do some Ayurvedic body work, such as Marma, and some other Ayurvedic Basti treatments that are on the body, not internal. And then also bring in sound work and Reiki and NLP hypnosis. So it really is this comprehensive journey for patients in my afternoons.
I'd love to hear about how you internally or maybe externally guide your patients on their health and wellness decisions, marrying the two bodies of medicine. Is there a flowchart, for lack of a better word, that you follow or guide them on following?
Yes, I would say there is structure in that I use the first visit to really get a detailed history and exam and really connect with the patient and understand where are the deeper roots of the current manifestations of disease. And the patient's coming in with some level of suffering. So my goal in that visit is to alleviate that as best as I can. And that's often with working on the physical plane, working on that annamaya kosha. And so I'll usually prescribe certain herbs or supplements to give that very tangible relief. And then subsequent visits, as patients are healing, I'll also in that first visit, I'll lay a foundation for detox. And when I say detox, I mean like purging ama and minimizing the generation of ama. And so then the subsequent visits, patients are really starting to feel better, usually within just 2 weeks on their first follow-up. They're noticing some significant benefits. And then we'll dive deeper and we'll work on those other layers of the aura of the other koshas and get deeper into the mental body. I'll usually incorporate a marma treatment during that second visit, and then see what the patient needs. It's very individualized. So I feel like so many people are carrying a lot of unresolved trauma, whether that be something minor to significant, but really holding on to it. So I find that doing an emotional heart nourishing treatment or a hridvasti is really helpful in a lot of patients. And then in some patients we'll also do some timeline therapy, so releasing negative emotions from the past. So I would say that overall my treatment plans are kind of begin on that physical body layer, and then we work through the koshas to really affect healing where it originated, or disease where it originated. So we're really healing the whole auric field.
Dr. Nisha, you brought up two terms that are pivotal to the understanding of Ayurveda, which is marma as well as ama. How would you describe them in your own words to our audience?
Marma is one of my favorite treatments to both receive and give. It's so profound, and I feel like a lot of people don't know about it. So it really is a pleasure to try to spread the knowledge there. So marma are energy points essentially, and they do map to a lot of the acupuncture points, and they're convergence points of blood, so arteries, nerves, veins, lymph, and they in Ayurveda are also access points to the mind. The mind is thought to be mapped across the whole body, and so we are able to affect the mind through these points, so affecting neurochemistry and relieve blocks, relieve ama at those points. So ama is toxicity. It's anything unprocessed. So anything that is not digested completely, whether that be physically, so through food or drink or pesticides, things that can't be digested, or mental, emotional. So any thought, experience, emotion that hasn't been fully processed to, in essence, its purest form, which would be love and understanding, is ama. And we hold this waste, essentially, this unprocessed material throughout the body, but especially at these energy points. And so when we press on them with intention, we're able to release it. And it's pretty incredible because during marma therapy, there will be a smell that gets emitted, kind of a foul odor essentially, with pressing certain points. And it's really that stagnant energy that can actually be smelled. So it's funny because, it's consistent with ama. Ama is thought to be this foul substance, right? It's like the junk that isn't processed. And so it actually has an odor when you release it energetically too through these points.
Completely. And I'm glad that you brought up ama's definition both so eloquently as well as almost tangibly, because it is such an important concept within Ayurveda that to be the best you can be, you must release all that you don't need, whether it's a physical toxin or an emotional toxin, and which is why we see the importance of detox, whether it is something daily like tongue cleaning or something more comprehensive, such as a panchakarma, as a central thesis to all treatments within Ayurveda. So I love that definition of ama that you just presented. What aspects of Ayurvedic healing have you seen shine the brightest? And I know there are many, but if I was to push you to select just a few, where have you seen Ayurveda have the most amount of impact and sometimes the most rapidly?
I would definitely say with patients who present with digestive difficulty, it's almost instant. So say indigestion, IBS type symptoms, um, flatulence, bloating. I usually layer functional medicine in as well. So sometimes it's hard to extricate the two as to what was the number one thing that, or the number one modality that affected the change. But I would say that if I were purely just using Ayurvedic principles, I would say that definitely digestive disease, IBS type symptoms and discomfort, as well as neurotransmitter related disease. So by that, I mean like nervous system dysfunction, things like insomnia, anxiety. And I think because Ayurveda has some really foundational lifestyle dietary pieces that are, so simple and easy to understand and implement, that and very powerful too, that once they are implemented, the feedback is almost instant in terms of the benefit.
I want to hold that thought because I want to come back to it in just a second because of a burning question I have around this topic. Quickly, would you, or rather, what advice or thoughts might you offer those who may be skeptical about nature-based healing modalities and sciences such as Ayurveda?
Yeah, so I would ask them to ask themselves the question of what have they been doing to now, and has it been working for them? Because if it hasn't, if they don't feel energetic, if they don't have a lot of vitality, if they're suffering with chronic disease, if they don't have great digestion and they don't have a lot of motivation, then there's a hole that needs to be filled, and what is currently available is not working. And some people don't, I think some people don't think that they can have the best health. They think, oh, okay, well, I'm just getting older and this is what happens to people, is that they don't feel as good. And so my invitation there would be to just up the up the bar of what could be possible, because in Ayurveda there are solutions and there are recommendations that can get you feeling your very best and not just mediocre.
I ask this because there are so many of us, just like you said, that sometimes feel resigned to living with these chronic ailments, fatigue, poor gut health. And I have to admit, sometimes I feel this way too, feeling rejected by traditional definitions of good health, whereby if something doesn't show up as a dire symptom about to kill you or as a major spike in your blood work, then it doesn't rise to the importance of needing treatment within traditional medicine or traditional Western medicine. So many of us go on living with ailments that are very significantly compromising the quality of our lives, and that traditional pills or potions don't really work for. So, in your work with countless patients over the years, are there a few examples that stand out as particularly notable in how Ayurveda influenced someone's healing journey? And I ask this because I know it will be very inspirational for many of us to hear, so that we can find that impetus to start on this self-healing journey where we can believe that we can have better health.
Yeah, I think that a couple things that come to mind are, in essence, let's talk about, say, IBS, where it's there isn't much available in traditional Western medicine aside from, you know, antidepressants and maybe some pills to help, with spasms. And so when a patient has been through the system, they've been to a GI specialist and they don't get any significant answers to their healing, then in those cases, it's so important to not stop and to keep digging. And so that's where Ayurveda would come in, and something so simple as a vata pacifying diet with warm cooked soupy food, avoiding crucifers, avoiding caffeine, avoiding alcohol, sodas, even just that could be life-changing for someone. I'll usually layer in a gut cleanse reset, which is more from the functional perspective, with that. And I am developing an e-course on guiding patients through such a reset. But something so simple as just making a dietary modification and giving the patients guidance as to don't eat this and eat this, which they haven't received in the past. But then miraculously, their symptoms are, almost completely better with such a simple change. Another such example would be patients with, say, menstrual disorders or PCOS type symptoms. So in traditional Western medicine, typically there isn't a lot of information as to how to manage this. And so patients will get placed on oral contraceptives, and it creates a bit of a catch because the oral contraceptives are a daily estrogen dose, and estrogen is playing a role in the pathogenesis of the disease or the ailments. And then patients with PCOS, for example, are not having regular ovulatory cycles and menstrual cycles, and therefore the birth control pill is there. They're placed on the birth control pill to mimic a normal menstrual cycle, but they are not ovulating and wouldn't be able to ovulate without whether they're on the pill or not. And so in those instances, it's really just a patch. It looks like you're having a menstrual cycle. So they feel like, oh, okay, well, maybe things are okay now. But then if they were to try to conceive, they wouldn't have fixed the root cause, which is not being able to ovulate. And then being on the birth control pill has its own slew of issues that develop from being on that, which is the higher estrogen, which contributes to the pathogenesis. The lack of ovulating on a birth control pill, that's how it works for contraception, is it impedes ovulation. And so in those patients, it's important to take the Band-Aid off and really look and see what caused this in the first place. What are the lifestyle issues? What are the dietary pieces that are contributing to this? And in those cases, it's often a combination of excess kapha and then also the poor elimination of waste and ama through the menstrual cycle. So those are just a couple that come to mind where traditional Western medicine isn't really offering any solution, but Ayurveda, and just looking at it as a systems-based approach and how each dhatu or tissue nourishes the next, and how we need to eliminate waste appropriately and follow the doshic dietary indications for the disease at hand, it really does give you some places to begin affecting healing at a root cause level.
I think that is, of course, a very astute observation, which you're very, very familiar with as an Ayurvedic expert, but worth calling out that many of us don't distinguish symptoms and root causes as much as we really should. And for true relief or a holistic solution, it is critical to peel back those layers, just as you talked about visiting the genesis of the issue rather than throwing band-aid solutions at it, which might seem simpler at the time, but in my experience, just compound the issue over time. So I love that Ayurveda always goes back to the root of an issue. Nisha, you grew up with an understanding of Ayurveda, and you also studied with some of the most revered Ayurvedic physicians, such as Dr. Vasant Lad. Were there surprises in your formal study of Ayurveda?
Surprises. I don't think so, because it felt so natural. It felt like a coming home. When things are, it, I remember for the first time feeling like I was passionate about something related to my career. I had studied and practiced internal medicine for several years before I studied Ayurveda formally with Dr. Lad. And it was funny because in my class, everybody was considering specializing into cardiology, GI, those kinds of things. And everyone would say, oh, just go with what you love, where your passion is. Pick that. And this was before integrative medicine was a fellowship or an option. And I remember just feeling like, oh my God, I guess I don't have passion when it comes to work. And then it was so funny because when I dove into Ayurveda at the Institute, the Ayurvedic Institute in Albuquerque, for the first time in my life, I felt, wow, okay, this is what passion feels like, to study something passionately. And so because of that passion and because of that really innate sort of feeling of this is it, it didn't surprise me. It just felt really natural. And I think coming from my Western background of studying medicine, it made so much sense to me because I had that framework already in place of health and how to visit with a patient, how to listen to them, that it just felt like I was adding the icing to my study. And I don't think I was surprised by anything other than the fact that I felt passion finally.
And that's completely fair to say. As you were talking, one of the feelings that came up in me around the quote unquote surprise, and maybe this is a signal to me about sort of working on intuition and self-worth, but I am constantly surprised, and maybe pleasantly so, about how intuitive Ayurveda always feels. And every time that I am presented with scholarly or academic answers, it always feels like I knew them. It's within me, within my body, within my senses. And it's rather pleasant to reconcile that with what I am studying. And again, this is not theoretically a surprise, but it is a pleasant admission, if you will, in that so much of Ayurveda is so very intuitive and ingrained in us.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think that was part of it. It just felt like flow and it made so much sense. And it was so easy to understand and also to explain. And so that contributed to that feeling of like, okay, this is it. And I remember thinking that I was invincible now in terms of my ability to work with patients and heal them, because I had this framework of looking at disease and illness that was just so not available to me before. Because in Western medicine, there's so many things that are idiopathic, essentially, and that means that in medicine we don't know why that happens. We don't know why platelets go down. Idiopathic thrombocytopenia. So to have this whole other modality and framework, a way of looking at things, I felt like, oh my gosh, I have the answers now. So that was really empowering, because I felt like I could really help more people. But you're so right that it really is simple. I think that it can feel like, oh, well, what is this with all this, modality with all these new words? But when you bring it back to the basics, when you bring it back to the qualities, when you bring it back to Agni and Ama, I think it doesn't take much to really have that intuitive sense of, okay, the world makes sense now,
Nisha, what dosha are you? And since we get this question a lot, I'd love for you to also share your journey of discovering your dosha. How long have you known? Have your feelings about it changed, and so forth?
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's an interesting question because at different points in my life, I felt like I've, had to follow the guidelines for every dosha, which has probably been a blessing because it helps me work with patients, having had the first-hand information. So when you're trying to discover your dosha, I emphasize this quite a bit in my communications and education, that you have to look at it from a few lenses. So we look at Prakriti, which is the innate constitution, Vikriti, the current imbalance. And I think oftentimes when people do a dosha quiz, they're kind of confounding the two. And if you are taking a quiz, then it's important to do it twice. So once is what was true for you in childhood, and then the second time as to what's true for you currently, I would say over the past 6 months or so. And that would give you those two states, the Prakriti and Vikriti. But I think more important than that is if you're in a state of imbalance, so essentially you're not happy about something is not perfect for you, then you have to look at what's the dosha of the complaint or the disease. And knowing that will bring that to balance. So you only really are concerned about your Prakriti in a few circumstances. One, if you're completely healthy, then you follow those guidelines to maintain health. But also just to kind of have in the background so that you know what you're most likely to aggravate if you go too far trying to balance a different dosha. So with that said, when I started kind of getting my Ayurvedic assessment done when I was 15 is when I met Dr. Lad as a patient. And it was funny because when you are imbalanced, your dosha, your Vikriti can obscure your Prakriti and actually make it seem like that's your Prakriti. So at that time I had Vata aggravation. And so my dosha was reading, Vata predominant, Pitta secondary. And so as I brought myself into balance over the years, my constitution was Pitta predominant. And then after school, I developed some kapha aggravating conditions. And so then I was more pitta kapha or kapha pitta. So I would say that a lot of Ayurvedic practitioners will tell you that you can't fully know your constitution until you're in the state of complete balance, because then your Vikriti won't obscure your Prakriti. And we can get more in-depth information about this through the pulse. There's different layers of the pulse, the seven layers, the top layer being the Vikriti, and the deepest layer, the Prakriti. But even with a pulse reading, if the Vikriti is high enough, it will obscure the Prakriti. So to answer your question about me and my dosha, I didn't believe it before because I was, for most of my life, I would say like 25 years, I followed Vata pacifying measures and a diet, and I felt Vata in every way. And I would I would work with some practitioners myself when I was in school, and I would say, I don't think you're Vata. I know you've got, a long history of being Vata and thinking that that's your constitution. having even had that being read by other practitioners, but you wouldn't have been able to go to medical school, and you wouldn't have the compassion in your heart if you didn't have more pitta and kapha in your constitution as more predominant. And finally, I believe them. And so I am pitta predominant with kapha and vata secondary.
I absolutely love that that entire description and story, because I know there is a tendency in all of us to deal with absolutes and want definitive answers because it makes the world make more sense. But in what you just said is the beauty of Ayurveda, and I'd argue the beauty of life, making sense of things that may not make sense immediately, as well as being comfortable with the discomfort that might bring up, is such a wise guiding principle for one's life. And I couldn't have said it more eloquently than you around the desperation to understand one's dosha, but being okay with how life may be changing that at a given point, and that Ayurveda and its pursuit are a journey rather than a destination of having figured out what your dosha is, and working within very fixed parameters of that. So thank you for sharing that. A couple more questions before I let you go. One is around fitting Ayurveda and its guiding principles within the constraints of modern life. I know a lot of people fear that they will not be able to keep up with the tenets of Ayurveda. And we know that it's all about starting small and doing what you can, but it still trips people up. How do you advise people get started and make accommodations with the constraints that they do have around work, around time constraints, around managing young children, and so forth?
Mm-hmm. I think it doesn't have to be something so foreign and out of the daily routine. There's some simple things that a lot of people can do or just build more awareness around, where they'll be implementing Ayurveda into their lifestyle without necessarily doing a 20-step dinacharya in the morning, which may take like 3 hours, I would say just following the natural rhythms of the day is probably the most basic way to begin to incorporate Ayurveda into your lifestyle. So by that, it's sleeping at 10 p.m. or close to that, so that you're really taking advantage of the kapha in the environment at that time to get the most restful, restorative sleep, making sure you're asleep between the pitta window of 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., where the energy should be directed at rejuvenation versus a second wind and creative pursuits outside of the body. And then waking with the sun and having your largest meal around noon when the sun is at the peak. Some really basic things like tongue scraping are really profound and simple to do, and they freshen your breath and just wake you up and stimulate your digestion and give you a daily assessment of what your ama is that day. Avoiding food combinations that are unhealthy, so keeping fruit entirely separate from other foods. I think with the trends and people really trying to be healthy, you can definitely be tempted to put everything in a smoothie and sweeten it with fruit, but really just keeping that out and not even having cold frozen type of drinks like smoothies for the most part. Incorporating warm water first thing in the day, making sure that most of your drinks are warm, sipping on warm water, less than a cup during a meal versus like a big glass of ice water that gets placed at your table when you go out, or trying to hydrate and eat at the same time, where in essence, you don't want to do that. You want to separate things out so that you can focus on eating and have your Agni be strong, the digestive enzymes not be diluted, but hydrate in between meals. And so I think in modern life, which is so busy, people are just trying to get it all in at once, whether it's the fruit in with everything else, or the hydration in with their food, and just separating those out. And I think it does take a conscious effort initially to make some changes, but then that becomes routine. And then, once something's a routine, it just flows, and there isn't a lot of energy that goes into keeping that flowing. Those are some things that come to mind, making sure that you're detoxing daily. So through the bowels, through the urine, through the sweat. These are things that are really easy, really basic, and will be the foundations of health, restoration, as well as maintenance going forward. So what do you think of that? Do you think that that would be too hard to implement?
I absolutely love that, because it takes, like you said, a little mindfulness at the outset, but becomes such intuitive, natural parts of one's routine that that really anybody can do them. Nisha, my personal journey with Ayurveda was that I grew up in a very Ayurvedic family and didn't realize that 90% of the things that I did or the way I ate was very deeply Ayurvedic. And I moved here to the United States about 12, 13 years ago, and sort of did a 180 whereby I discarded many of the principles I grew up with in pursuit of everything cool, new, modern, and found that it wasn't serving my body, mind, health quite the way I wanted for it to, and went back to rediscovering, this time round almost with an academic / scientific lens, the practices I'd grown up with. And of course, some habits were harder to unlearn than others, but some of the things that you touched on came back in the easiest, most natural of ways. So I love that you started there, because once you just apply a little bit of mindfulness around how you put in food in your mouth, the fact that your stomach should feel a third full of air, a third full of water, a third full of food, as Dr. Lard advises, is very natural. And now I sort of feel full at that point in my meal. It's just about quickly observing and paying attention to what you are doing. That switches that within you, and observing those things can have such a meaningful difference in your life and your detox processes. So I absolutely loved everything that you answered. I did have one question around acute ailments, and would love to hear your thoughts on that, because I know everyone has a different perspective on it. My mother, as an Ayurvedic, has a different perspective than I do about popping an Advil when I feel aches and pains. What is yours?
So for acute ailments such as pain, or can you give me some other examples that you're thinking of?
One of the things is let's say pains around menstruation, or a headache from having worked on a computer too long. And I do remember growing up as a child, my mother sort of counseled me out of too much pain medication. I do remember that when I was PMSing, she did not like my taking an Advil. This is something that I do now. And in that, she and I differ. I'd love to hear what your perspective on taking medication such as an Advil at a time one needs, and sort of while not being blind to why those things are coming up in the body are.
Yeah, so I typically practice and recommend minimizing pharmaceuticals as much as possible. being a Western trained doctor, I don't hesitate to use them if I feel like they're indicated. And I think that's part of the beauty of kind of knowing what situations really warrant that. So, for example, with PMS, I would be more interested in getting to the root of what is causing that pain and that dysfunction. I think oftentimes women aren't slowing down enough during their menstrual cycle, especially the first couple days, are really an opportunity to go inward and to allow that detoxification to occur through the menstrual fluid. And if we are, really just trying to maintain our regular day-to-day lifestyle, it could feel like, okay, well, I'm going to need an Advil to do that. But if you are using those first 2 days as actually a time for just you to journal, to meditate, to nurture yourself in whichever ways you feel are appropriate for you, then using a heating pad would be an option. So personally, I don't schedule patients during those first 2 days of my menstrual cycle. And if I do have someone scheduled, for example, if the day surprises me, then I will reschedule those appointments, and my patients are usually understanding. So it's something I do myself, but also encourage patients to do as well, wherever it's possible. I know that our society and work schedules don't always accommodate for that. So yeah, in the acute instance of pain, I mean, I've actually found a lot of benefit with CBD versus an Advil, whether that be for a headache or menstrual pain. So there are alternatives that are popping up or becoming more growing in our awareness, that we can use outside of pharmaceuticals. I don't think that one Advil here and there is going to significantly impact your body or backtrack you. It's more the chronic use of those medications that do lead to leaky gut dysfunction, inflammation, and kidney disease. So I think occasional use is fine, but I would actually invite patients to find alternatives that are, work equally well, because there's lots of herbs as well as lifestyle practices that can be implemented, for menstrual periods, for example, the use of castor oil packs, really lightening the diet the week prior to menstruation, ginger tea, even things like acupuncture and some other herb combinations can be really great. So I like to think that pain is a signal that we need to pay attention to. And so menstrual pain is sort of like our monthly report card of how did we rest, how did we manage stress, and when it comes to other pains, like, okay, yeah, you have a headache because you've been on the computer too long, so the solution is to get off the computer, and not do that again. And then, but in the interim, I don't want people to suffer either. So I do, for example, with me, if I injure myself, like have a knee injury or something, I know that in the first 24 hours, you want to let your body bring those inflammatory mediators to that joint so that they can start to heal the area. But after that point, after the first couple of days, if you're still having pain, then an anti-inflammatory like an Aleve, if you're not doing CBD, but an anti-inflammatory would be helpful, because then the inflammation cycle is not really useful anymore and it's just causing more harm. So the same thing with a fever, for example. So if in those a low-grade fever that isn't causing seizures and isn't causing significant discomfort, is actually a good thing. It's good to let your body have that fever so that it can burn the ama and fight the infection. Your body's natural defense is to do that. It creates the fever for that purpose. So if you were to pop a Tylenol or an Advil to reduce the fever, then you're pretty much robbing your body of that opportunity that it's creating to help fight the infection. However, it doesn't need to have a fever to 104, and so if you if that's going to lead to a seizure, for example, in a child, then you do want to bring that down. So and the same thing with mucus. We're in this viral season right now with COVID. So mucus is actually a good thing. It's there. It's trying to drain out the infection, clear it out through the sinuses. And I see a lot of patients who, at the very sign of a sniffle, will increase their allergy medicines and increase their use of sinus medications, decongestants, and those things actually cause more problems because now the body can't, that mucus is getting drier and getting trapped, so it's getting stuck, and it leads to sinus pain. It leads to more of a chronic infection, whereas it starts out as a viral infection. It then can become bacterial, necessitate antibiotics, which then cause further damage because now that disrupts the immune system in the gut, which we can't recover from. So I feel like there are uses for these responses in our body, and we shouldn't try to use a lot of over-the-counter medicines to thwart these really helpful responses. But then there is a point where the body overcompensates, and in those circumstances, the use of something, whether it be herbal or pharmaceutical, can be really helpful.
For sure. And personally, around PMS symptoms, they're definitely a signal from my body. I have found that if I have not done a good job keeping my kapha under control in the month, that is when signs of PMS most profoundly show up for me. And months that have been active and eating not very kaphagenic foods, the symptoms are definitely less. So it's couldn't agree more that many of these things are signals from your body in its ability to work with you to live your best life. So thank you for that very comprehensive and very scientific discussion on how some of those processes actually go down within us. Are there any thoughts, advice, or maybe even questions that I might have missed during our conversation that you'd like to speak to?
I think it's important from an Ayurvedic perspective to really think about your immunity as being supported by your Agni. So if you have a strong Agni, then that's your biggest defense. And I think a lot of people are really interested in taking vitamin C and zinc and, all kinds of other immune boosting supplements, which I really think are helpful. And I take them myself and I recommend them. But we can't look at supplements in isolation outside of digestion. So if you're taking a lot of vitamin C and zinc, but then you're eating a lot of dairy, which is going to create mucus and suppress the Agni, then that's just, you're not really addressing your immunity and your immune system. So I think I just wanted to emphasize that point, that anything that you can do to boost your Agni is going to be so much more helpful than anything that you can take for your immune system. And I say do both. So, so things that you can do to boost Agni are eating light, digestible food. So food that is very close to its form that it occurs in nature. So unprocessed, no food additives, avoiding pesticides, and then some of the herbs that we know to boost Agni, such as fresh grated ginger, cumin, coriander, fennel, whether you have those in teas or mix those in with your food or both, or even chewed as a spice mix after a meal. Drinking warm liquids throughout the day, avoiding cold, which will put out the warmth of the fire, and then making sure you're detoxing appropriately so that your Agni doesn't have to work as hard. So those would be some of the kind of basic immune boosting, Agni boosting tips, which go hand in hand. And then I would say also, given this current time with COVID, there's there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of media and overwhelm, and that's not good for immunity either, because the other seat of the immune system is in the heart. And so I mean, I don't know if you've noticed this, but anytime there's a lot of an emotional heaviness, the immune system goes down, and it's almost direct. And I think that we really need to protect our heart in this time, and process through anything old that's coming up, which is ama too, mental emotional ama, but also try to find the joy and try to recognize the positive that exists with the negative, and really just see that bright side, because that will open the heart, and which will directly energetically influence the thymus gland, which is a seat of immunity. And so I kind of see the heart and the thymus is intimately connected in the high heart. And so responding to situations with a sense of openness rather than contraction. I have been to the grocery store, and it's been challenging, because everybody is in a place of isolation, and whether that's home quarantining or just, don't touch me, don't look at me, don't come anywhere near me. And so how can we maintain that open energy while still being cautious and mindful of social distancing? I think that's really important, to not make anyone wrong, or not to look at anyone as an aggressor, if someone coughs around you, but to maintain that open heart, where there will be an open flow of energy into your thymus through your immune system. And I would say those would be the two main things for boosting your immunity, especially right now.
That does bring me to one question that I know is going through many people's mind around autoimmune disorders, because I have found that it is one of the most challenging disorders or imbalances to address with traditional Western medicine. Anything that you can offer up there, I know would be so appreciated by so many.
So in Ayurveda, we see autoimmune disease as an ama disorder. So there's ama that's coating the cells, and that's what's preventing the recognition of the immune system as a self. It looks at it and it sees a foreign invader, because either the ama itself is masking the self cell, or it is the target of the immune system. So reducing ama is imperative. And, there are so many ways to do that, through the daily detox that we talked about, but also through a deeper cleanse with an Ayurvedic practitioner, such as a version of Panchakarma. I think in the next month or so, I'll be releasing a home cleanse that patients can do with an Ayurvedic foundation. And so cleansing is so important, but then also healing leaky gut. So leaky gut is basically a permeable small intestinal membrane. And this is not traditional Western thought, but it is researched heavily and supported by functional medicine. And it is also in alignment with Ayurveda, as the small intestine really being a seat of Agni and transformation recognition. And so what happens is that there's various insults that can occur to the gut, whether that's through food sensitivity, overgrowth of certain organisms in the gut that shouldn't be there, such as yeast, parasites, and then environmental toxins that are coming in, whether that's through pesticides, plastics, food additives, heavy metals in the water. So all of these things are, chronic over-the-counter medicine use, like Aleve and aspirin, NSAIDs. So these things are basically injuring the gut. And what happens is then that membrane that's supposed to be really tight becomes permeable. Right on the other side of the membrane is the immune system. So now you have big particles, proteins in food, such as gluten and dairy, casein protein, that are going through these gaps. Even the organisms that should be walled off in the small intestine, in the intestinal lining, the intestinal contents is able to communicate with the immune system. And so that is activating the immune system. Bacterial compounds such as LPS are getting through these gaps and leading to body-wide inflammation. So now you have an aggravated state of the immune system. It's hyperactive and it is more prone to attacking. So it's a combination of ama, and it's a combination of leaky gut. And many of the causes of ama are related to leaky gut, and they are ama in and of itself, like things that shouldn't be there. Ama is also something that shouldn't be in a place where it is, right? So when pitta gets aggravated and it moves out of the small intestine and into the bloodstream, that's pitta ama. It should be in the small intestine in its home, but it's traveled out to a place where it shouldn't be, in the circulatory system, in the lymph and the rasa. And so now it's pitta ama because it's dislocated. So it really is a combination of ama, leaky gut, that contributes to autoimmune disease. And I feel that if people could start to look at it through those lenses and heal leaky gut and minimize ama and release ama through the body, then they would do so well to really affecting the root of the disease. And I typically in my practice guide patients through an approach like that. So we'll do a gut reset, which is basically cleansing the gut of these overgrown organisms, removing the environmental toxins, and then follow it with more of an Ayurvedic protocol. So now that we've cleansed, we can start to rebuild with the things that are most appropriate for that person's dosha. These have been some of the most popular things that I've been using in my practice. So I decided to just try to reach more people. And I created that gut cleanse guide and reset. And then the Ayurvedic Foundations guide I'm releasing probably a month after that. So it's in essence how I practice medicine. It's definitely not individually tailored the way it would be in a patient's visit, but because I was just seeing so many incredible transformations with patients working at that root cause level, that I felt like it was just really important to try to, bring that to more people.
I love your articulation of it, not to mention that I can't wait for the resources that you just offered up to hit ground. I do hear you that Ayurveda traditionally has been such a personalized science, but have also come to see and believe in the widespread benefits that the science has to offer, even in more objective formats, such as talking about it now, or through pieces that are written around broad populations rather than an individual. So I can't thank you enough for everything incredible that you have offered up, both in the last hour as well as are offering up in coming days, as incredible resources for people to discover their bodies, discover their balances, and start to heal through Ayurveda. So, Dr. Nisha, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I look forward to staying connected and offering people more as time goes by. But this has been an incredible starting place.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure. I love teaching, and I love being able to share. Like you started off saying, that this is so simple and it's so profoundly transformative that I feel that, we all deserve to know about it and partake of it and share it.
Thank you so much for your generosity around that. It truly is very, very kind of you to offer your time, your patience, your insight around this topic to so many that I know will value this incredibly.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like more information on our guests and the additional references during our conversation, please visit us at umaoils.com. That is U-M as in Mary, AOILS.com. And please subscribe to the Uma Ayurveda podcast and share. See you next time.